time to drop it. What's going on, guys? Matt aka Martiln here, and welcome back to the fourth video in my simulation breakdown series. This video is probably going to be the longest, so strap in, get yourself a drink and take down some notes. In this video we're going to be going over the drops of the tune Simulation that came out back in December 2019. And if you haven't heard it, and if you haven't seen the first 3 parts of this series already, highly recommend you go and listen to it and watch those before coming back and watching this video right here. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the Ableton session. All right, so here we are in the Ableton Live 10 session for Simulation once again. And in this video, we're going to be going over the drops and how I created them, structured them, and a few little sound design things in here as well. I don't want this video to be super long, so I'm not going to go crazy in depth with a lot of things. But if you see anything that you're like, oh, you want me to go more in depth in those, more than happy to do a video on that too. So probably the easiest place to start with this is the drums. And the drums in this drop, both these drops are pretty simple. And if I just solo them, you'll be able to hear that. So for the first little bit, it's basically just kick and snare and some fills and crash. And then the second half of the drop, I add in the hi-hats and some more crashes as well. The hi-hat pattern is basically exactly the same as what happens in the verse B section previously, which is cool because it's kind of acted as a nice little tease for what's coming up. You'll also probably notice that the snare sound in this drop is different to what's actually happened previously. It's just because it's a more powerful snare and sounds a lot better in this section than the other kind of trappy, future bassy style snare. So probably the next logical thing to get into, because this drop is pretty bass heavy, is the basses. So what I'm going to do is just play the start of this drop to give you a little bit of context, and you can watch and see how all these different bass sounds and all the different sounds are interacting with each other. So let's dive into these drop basses really quickly. So as you'll notice, I've got this kind of group here that says drop basses broken up into 2 other little groups, I suppose. I've got this high basses group here and this sub group, which is how I'm doing a lot of my bass heavy drops nowadays. I like having a lot of control over the sub because you can do some really cool things, and you can also keep it consistent for mixing as well. So this sub is really quite basic. If I solo it, it's just an operator patch with a few different harmonics introduced using the kind of additive waveform editor of operator. And then I've got some shaper going on in the filter, and that is pretty much it. It sounds like this. You'll notice it's also playing the same note, which it essentially plays the same note for most of the drop. That's because the kind of harmonic parts of the drop happen in these turnarounds here, and the sub for that is provided by this verse bass going on up here. So the other part of this drop basses group is this high bass, or the high basses, I should say, of which there are 5. I was just seeing if I actually use the 5th one in this. Sometimes I create a patch and I don't use it, but I just leave it there. So the first one, or the high basses together, sound like this. And you can see how I've done it is I've kind of got them alternating. I go, high bass 1, high bass 2, high bass 3, and then I'll just kind of take that pattern that's going on there, copy it over for the next however long, 4 bars or whatever, sometimes 2 bars, and then just vary it a little bit, and then try and change up the drum pattern and everything to match whatever it is I'm hearing going on in my head. Most of these bass patches, I would say, have been created in Wavetable, except for the high bass 5 over here, which only happens like once or twice. And a few of these are actually just presets that I started out with. In fact, all of them are presets that I started out with and then just kind of modified. Wavetable is super, super powerful and great for creating these kind of intense bass sounds, especially when you couple it with pedal, which, as you can see, I've done on pretty much every bass sound here because pedal is incredible. And then I've got them all running into this group, which has some EQ, compression, some other stuff going on as well. The EQ is mainly to cut out the low end, which is being filled up by the other sub channel. And then I've got some OTT and some more mid-side compression, and I drive that all into a saturator just at the end to make sure that all the levels between the different bass sounds are consistent, because that can be a bit of a problem when you're using a few different bass sounds like I am. As you'll also notice, if I open up the automation here, well, got a little bit of automation going on. Wavetable is great, but it's not as versatile in terms of its envelopes or LFOs as something like Serum is, for example. You don't have a lot of control over these different shapes. So I find that using automation is a great way to kind of get around this. And also you can do some cool things, as I've done here with this bass, this second high bass. You'll notice that these automations, this filter cutoff that's being controlled, is actually different from these first two hits to these kind of faster 16th note hits, which is something that if you were to just use an LFO for this, for example, would be a little bit harder to achieve. And if I play this, you'll be able to hear the difference between this filter movement that's going on. Kind of get more like a wow wow and then a digga 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 that's going on there, which is really, really cool and useful to be able to do that. So these bass patterns just kind of continue on for a while, and I just add in some little fills, different variations of the sounds and stuff that's going on, and kind of make it a little bit more complex as it goes on as well, because I want to introduce the more simple elements of it, even though it's still pretty complex, and then slowly kind of build on more of this original, like, 4-bar kind of pattern that I've got between these different bass sounds. So as you'll see, this kind of second to last group of high bass sounds is pretty different. And again, just create some interest and variation. And so you'll also notice what's kind of interesting is how I've structured this drop with the rest of the instruments that are going on as well. So if I play this, you'll notice that the kind of end of every 4 bars or so, we have the chords coming in as a bit of a turnaround to the next 4 bars. And this kind of creates a bit of a call and response between the more like bass heavy single notes that are going on, and then the more melodic harmonic parts of the tune, and also allows for some kind of connection to the rest of the tune, so it's not just kind of a little bit out of place, if you know what I mean. So if I play this, you'll get what I mean. So you'll also notice that these kind of 4 bars are broken up into like two different types of 4 bars. This first 4 bars ends with the chords and that kind of plucky, like rhythmic guitar sample, and then the second 4 bars ends with the guitar melody. So it kind of switches back and forth between them to create this essentially like an 8-bar kind of phrase, right? Which is essentially how this drop is structured. We've just got these repeats of these 8-bar phrases, just happens 4 times, just with variation in them and some addition of elements in terms of the drums and some different bass sounds, etc. The chords and the synths and stuff that are going on are the same as what's happened previously, except for this little top line that's here, which is just to emphasize the top notes of the chords. And really, it doesn't sound that hugely pleasing to listen to on its own, but I'll show it to you anyway. And if I play the chords with it, and then I turn off that top line, back on, it just kind of adds a little bit of more texture to the sound. And that's essentially the drop, right? I've got a few different effects and stuff going on as well, some different exhaust sounds, a few little different rises here to accentuate certain stops and lead into the next parts. If you listen to the tune, you'll be able to try and pick it apart a little bit more. But essentially how I write this is I'll just start with that 4 bars and then I'll duplicate that 4 bars or whatever and then figure out, okay, I think it'd be cool to add this little thing or add this little thing. And then just creating these little variations and then changing things such as the drums to accent these variations just creates a lot of interest and movement in the tune. The second drop is structured in pretty much exactly the same way, except we start with the hi-hats going on and then we add in a ride cymbal in the second half of the drop, and just the drums in the second half of the second drop sound like this. You can hear that ride going on there. Just again adds another layer, some more interest, some more complexity. Keep the listener engaged, right? And although this second drop is structured pretty much essentially the same as the first drop, none of it is exactly the same. And that's kind of what I always try to achieve. So using different things like automation here, I've got this unison amount automated, which I don't have happening in the first drop. As you can see here, I've got this unison amount automated on this first bass sound, which creates that more of like a detuned sound, as opposed to this sound, and just some different variations in placement, some kind of melodic variations that are going on as well, such as this little turnaround riff thing here, which is cool. I really like this bass sound for using that. It's really cool with like pitch elements that it has and the kind of underwatery stuff. Just using some different filters, you're able to achieve these really cool sounds. And as I mentioned, the pedal is a huge part of all this bass sound design for me. It's just creates really gnarly and wacky bass sounds, which when I do breakdowns of future tunes and stuff, or if I ever do like creating kind of bass sounds using Wavetable enabled stock plugins, which if you want that, let me know, then you'll absolutely see that. But yeah, like I said, other than that, this drop is pretty much structured essentially the same. We've got this first 4 bars where at the end of it, the guitar kind of pluck comes in with the chords going on as well. And then the guitar melody comes in after that. And then again, pluck, melody, pluck, melody, pluck, melody. It's just about kind of thinking of really simple ways to structure something and then within that creating some kind of a variation. So there's this familiarity, but there's also this interest that's going on. And then this drop just goes into the outro and then the song ends. And that's about it. Alright, so that wraps up my video series breaking down my track Simulation. I know that was probably a little bit of overview of the stuff in there, but I'm happy to go more in depth on some of those techniques. If you want me to, just let me know down in the comments and I will make sure to get to your requests. But as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Turn on the notifications by clicking the bell to make sure that you get my next video as soon as it comes out. And if you're really interested in what I'm doing, I'll put a link down in the description as well where you can sign up to my mailing list, or you can check out my Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff to stay up to date with the other fun stuff that I'm doing. Got some releases and stuff coming out, and playing some shows and stuff like that. Gonna be a lot of fun. And as always, hope you're having a good day, and I'll catch you in the next video.